Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. David Sarwar. I'm the Associate Dean for Research in the College of Public Health, and I also have the pleasure of being a professor in our Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences as well. In the 6.5 years that I've been with the college, one of my absolute favorite things to do is to do what I'm doing right now, which is to introduce members of our faculty and our community who are doing just really important and impactful work that is such an important part of the fabric of what we do as a college, both now and what we can do in the future to and improve the health and well-being not only of our students on campus, but also of people in North Philadelphia, throughout the city and throughout the region as well. So today it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Laura Sinko, who is a new member of our faculty in the Department of Nursing within the college. And Laura comes to us with a phenomenal training background, but also a really interesting and important interest in the areas of sexual assault survivorship. The unfortunate reality is that the statistics around the experience of sexual assault and other adverse childhood experiences across our population is quite sobering. And it's only been within the last few years that we've actually seen much more of a focus on strategies and approaches to work with survivors and to figure out ways to promote healing as well as long-term well-being. And Laura, along with some of her colleagues, has put together, I think, a really inspiring and engaging video, as well as some other very creative multimedia projects to really help guide this discussion, not only today, but also for the larger community. So I'm thrilled that we have a really robust audience that's going to be joining us this afternoon. I'm thrilled to hear what Laura and her colleagues have to share with all of us. And then I'll be back towards the end to moderate the question and answer session as we get a little bit after 5 o'clock. But until then, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Sinko. Dr. Sinko?
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be speaking with you today. I have with me a wonderful panel. I have Levon Kennedy, and I also have Brittany Robinson from the Temple Wellness Resource Center, as well as Philadelphia's Center Against Sexual Violence. So they will be joining us and doing some more panel discussion later in the talk, but I wanted to introduce them up front because they really provide a wealth of knowledge and experience working with survivors on the ground as they try to reach their healing goals. So welcome. I'm so excited for everyone who is here. I know it's the end of the day, it's the middle of the semester, and it can be really difficult to make it for these things, but I really hope this is worth your while. Today, we're going to be talking about topics that may be particularly distressing, including issues of physical, emotional, and sexual harm. So while our focus today will be on supporting survivors and learning about the healing journey, we're aware that some topics brought up might be triggering or might make you feel uncomfortable. And so please feel free to utilize the supports provided or virtually step out as needed. We're really excited to learn together, but want to make sure everybody feels safe. So you know yourself best, take care of yourself, but thank you for challenging yourself to be in this discussion today. So we have a couple supports in place that I wanted to highlight for folks that might need it throughout the presentation. So I have with me Julia Ha and Angela Harrison. These are both master's prepared social workers who served as the project coordinators on my project that used photography, which I will be sharing later in the presentation. And so if you want any one-on-one processing as things get difficult, they will put their private Zoom chats Zoom links in the chat. So please feel free to click on that. There'll be a waiting room, and as long as no one's sitting in there, they'll admit you and you can have some conversation if that would be helpful. We also provided the resource for the virtual healing room that was created by the Me Too movement. They have an incredible survivor healing series. I really recommend you check it out. But this is something that has different forms of media, music, different grounding exercises, things that you might want to do on your own if you don't really feel like talking to anybody else. And then finally, Philadelphia is really fortunate to have a 24/7 hotline for survivors of sexual violence or supporters of survivors. So if you want to get connected to services, have any additional questions, Angela will put in the chat the phone number, which is 215-985-3333. And so before we start the presentation, Julia and Angela, is there anything that you want to say before you go dark and get into your rooms?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Angela. I'm a mental health therapist in the tri-state area. I have worked with Dr. Sinko on some of her projects related to healing and survivorship. And I just want you to know, as Laura stated, that sometimes this content and these topics can elicit a strong response. And I'm here to support and help you through that if you're feeling overwhelmed or really struggling with the content. I am going to drop in the chat my private room, and we can just talk and process one-on-one if you're struggling. Okay.
Hello, everyone. Very similarly to Angela, my name is Julia, and I am also a social work public health practitioner. And I'm just so honored to have worked with Dr. Sinko just from the beginning of this amazing project. And I've also included my link to my personal Zoom meeting. So please just pop in at any point during this webinar.
Awesome. Thank you so much, you two. So our agenda today, we're going to start by just talking about what do we know about survivor healing. And so this is more going to be a high level summary. So it's taking the results that I found in many of my studies, as well as synthesizing all the literature I could find that asks survivors their perspectives of what healing means to them. Because I really believe survivors are the experts of their own experience. And you'll find that internationally, cross-culturally, the way folks try to reach some of these goals might be extremely different. But I've found that some of these goals are really similar in where you're really trying to go. And so I'm excited to share that with you all today. I'm then going to introduce briefly the study that I did and then our online photography exhibit, which we won't go through together, but I'll provide the link that you can go through on your own time. It really makes some of these themes come to life in the lives of people living in Philadelphia who are experiencing these things. We then will debut for Temple my film, Finding the Strength to Heal, which is really exciting. It was truly a labor of love, and I really can't wait to share that with you, which highlights the journeys of 4 sexual violence survivors. And that video specifically is about campus sexual assault. So while the exhibit is more about sexual violence in general, the video is really zoomed in on what does that look like on a college campus. And then we'll close with a panel discussion about healing, where you can submit questions or any comments, things that you'd like to share. And we already had a lot of really amazing questions submitted before the webinar, so we'll tend to those as well. And anything we do not get to, I will provide my contact information, and you can feel free to reach out to me directly. So I'm going to start with the statistics because these are the hard things to hear, but we'll get to the healing. But we got to really know what's the impact, what is the scope of this issue. And so often I think that we think that it's kind of a women's issue when we think of sexual violence. And we know that women are disproportionately impacted, but women aren't the only ones that experience sexual harm. So according to RAINN, which is one of the largest nonprofits for sexual violence, every 68 seconds an American is sexually assaulted. And it's not just women. We know nearly 1 in 2 transgender and gender nonconforming individuals experience sexual violence in their lifetime. We also know more than 1 in 3 women experience these sorts of things. And finally, even 1 in 4 men. And so these statistics can vary depending on the type of sexual violence that we're talking about. So when we're talking about the legal definition of sexual assault or rape, women and gender nonconforming or non-binary individuals do have significantly disproportionate rates compared to men. But when we're talking about sexual harm and contact sexual violence on the surface, the rates are fairly similar. So I really think it's important to involve individuals of all genders in this conversation. And so I don't want to go too much into the impact because I feel that's what we hear a lot about, but I do want to share the various ways that sexual harm can impact us. So it can impact us physically. It can cause things like chronic pain, headaches, stomach aches, gynecological or reproductive issues, and even difficulties with intimacy, which can be really difficult for people who are trying to form new relationships. We also have the emotional and mental health impacts, which can be depression, anxiety, PTSD, but even beyond diagnoses, shame, self-blame, a decrease in self-worth. And so it's important to tend not just to the diagnostic criteria, but also these internal feelings that we can have after these experiences. It can also impact us in our environment. We might not feel like our environment is safe anymore. We might not really want to be in certain environments that we used to hold very dear for a variety of reasons. It can impact us financially and occupationally. Not only can sexual violence, like any health condition or a condition that impacts your health, it has impacts financially for the medical procedures that you do, for the counseling that you might need, but also some folks might leave their university if they're a student, or might need to leave their job, or might not be able to maintain a job. And that can really impact that occupational and financial health. Socially, if you experience these things, you might find it difficult to trust people. It might be difficult to reach out, to go back into these social settings where maybe you were harmed in the first place. And finally, it can really impact us intellectually and spiritually, because there's a million things that can go on in your head once you experience something so rattling like sexual harm. It might cause you to question your belief in a higher power. It might cause you to question your relationship with yourself and intellectualize these things and kind of doubt yourself. And so I shared this photograph to the left because some of my research is focused on photography, as I'll share later. But this one survivor staged this photo and she called it Inside Out to describe a darker moment she experienced. And I think it's really powerful because it really gives us a visual of what it feels like on the inside of our brains when we experience these things sometimes, and we're really struggling. You know, she said, this picture really describes how I feel, because I feel like I'm sitting out in the rain, I'm soaking wet, and all I want is for someone to put a blanket around me and tell me it's okay to come inside. And something about that photo really struck me as this is sort of what it feels like inside your head sometimes. That can be difficult to describe in words alone. So like I said, today we're going to be talking about survivor healing. And so I'm going to share a personal story about myself that will maybe contextualize this a little bit. So I always knew I wanted to study sexual violence when I got into my PhD program. I was about halfway through my PhD program when I myself experienced a sexually violent event. And I was studying this, healing was always going to be the topic. And so in my head, I kind of thought of like this image to the left, you know, I'm unfortunately, not to be dark, but maybe one of the better persons this can happen to, because I know what to do. I'm studying this, I learned this thing, and it's the way like we cope, right? And intellectualize some of these processes. So in my head, I was like, oh, this is going to be great. It's going to get better. Don't worry about it. Like trying to be positive. It'll get better with time. Now, let me tell you, you can only intellectualize so much and think you know so much, but then when it happens to you, it's an incredibly different experience. So really, it was more like what was happening on the right, with these knots and tangles and backslides. And sure, zooming out and looking back, things do sort of have this upward trajectory. But man, when you're in the thick of those knots, it is really hard to imagine that life can get better. And so I share that with you because I think a lot of survivors might feel that way, that you expect this linear journey when we know that healing is definitely not linear. So when we go into the literature and we ask survivors who all over the world who've been interviewed by a lot of dedicated researchers, what does healing mean to you? These are what these folks often say. So healing is multidimensional. It is something, you know, like I mentioned, with the different forms of ourselves that can impact our physical, our environmental, our spiritual. You kind of have to cater to all those things separately sometimes, because they all kind of serve different parts of us and might have different problems or things that need healing. It's also iterative. So there's a lot of trial and error. There's a lot of things that you might try that just don't work. It might work for someone else and it doesn't work for you. And so that points to the non-linearity of this, and also the need for patience, because setbacks do occur, especially if you're really putting yourself out there and trying new things. And finally, this piece of active engagement, which I find really interesting. We often hear that healing gets better with time, but unfortunately what we're seeing is time might not be enough. There really is an immense amount of effort that it takes. And it's hard to tell someone that's struggling and who's feeling frozen and feeling immobilized that you gotta make some steps forward, and really nobody can do that but the survivor themselves. And so it's extremely difficult, but I think it's important to give credit when you see survivors in your life healing, that's their hard work, and really acknowledging that is important. So we found these overall healing goals, and I will go into each of them individually, but here are them at a bird's eye view. So there's trauma processing and reexamination, managing negative states, rebuilding the self, connecting with others, and regaining hope and power. So these are the 5 overall healing goals that we found survivors, at least in the scientific literature, who've been interviewed, who've been sharing their experiences to try to help us make sense of this. These are the 5 things that folks seem to be looking for. But again, the way they go about finding these things can be completely and utterly different. And so I want to share this quote because I think it really solidifies what healing means. And this is one of my participants from a previous study. And so she said, forgive yourself for all the things that are going to go wrong, because a lot of times healing just isn't effective unless a lot has gone wrong. It's totally normal to let things fall apart before you can pull them together and start healing. And so she cites this Hemingway quote that she likes, that is, the world breaks all of us, but some of us are stronger in the broken places. So for her, really being able to identify that she's been hurt and being able to own that and get strong from that was really empowering. And so our first theme is trauma processing and re-examination. And so being able to really re-examine one's experience and recognize the things within their environment that reinforced all of these negative feelings they were feeling was helpful for them. Being able to point out these social and cultural norms of violence. It can be really difficult to get to this point, but when you start to look at the way sexual harm and just violence in general is normalized in our society, you can't unsee it. But that also, I think, helps people make sense of their own experiences and where they fit into the larger world. And so by making sense of their encounter, putting it in context, and looking inward to really understand their responses and their needs, they were able to let go of self-blame and really envision a path forward. And so there's 2 main components of this. And there's that meaning-making component, and also this idea of self-evaluation of, like I said, looking inward and figuring out what happened, what am I feeling, and what are my needs going forward. So the next theme that I would like to share is managing negative states. And this is pretty self-explanatory, right? Obviously, a lot of negative or challenging things can happen to us after these experiences. So it was very clear that there was a lasting impact on many survivors' lives. And so learning how to manage and cope with these effects was really important to allow survivors to feel a sense of freedom from pain and feel more in control over their current circumstances. And it was equally important for survivors to recognize that experiencing negative states didn't make them weak or broken, especially in America. When I do cross-cultural research, it's the Americans in particular, they just want to be strong. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And you know what? I don't know if that's true. Sometimes these things just really are hard, and just acknowledging that they're hard and you don't have to be strong all the time is okay. And so really trying to learn how to manage that internal dialogue, the shame, the self-blame, the negative self-talk, managing the distressing emotions that they feel, and then also their trauma reactions and symptoms if they have any PTSD or any of those other symptoms that might happen as a result. And so as survivors shared here, healing is not a linear process, but understanding the low points, I guess it's not really progress in a sense if you're not having those sorts of low points. You're still probably shoving things to the side. So don't really see it as a setback. You will just carry these things differently. And this is all these quotes that I'm sharing are from survivors from various studies that I have led. And so these are just survivors' thoughts on some of these themes. So our next theme is rebuilding the self. So there's 5, this is theme 3. So we're halfway there. But rebuilding the self, this is a tricky one, right? Because a lot of survivors talk about, I want to go back to the way things used to be. I want to be able to walk down the street and not feel afraid. I want to be able to do those things. And sure, maybe that's a goal that some people can reach. But some survivors express that this trauma just made them feel different or lost. And especially when it involved relationships that repeatedly harmed or violated them, many discuss a desire to work towards regaining a sense of their true self, which may or may not be their previous self, but still finding themselves within this chaos and trying to build a meaningful path forward. And so in order to rebuild, survivors really reflected on accepting the things that they could not change, while also embracing with curiosity to learn more about themselves and their desires, this new them. For some, it really felt like a new them, and really being able to give reverence to that and meet this new person and keep this new person safe, while also trying to weave in some of these old things that you used to enjoy and trying to figure out how to balance that. So there were a couple sub themes here: to construct your identity, to improve your self-concept, and also to renew your spirit, to kind of get that childlike self back, and that joy and that laughter, which can be extremely hard after these experiences. And so I love this quote because I think it's really helpful when we're thinking about, what do we do with this trauma now that it's happened to us? And so this survivor said, healing is a process. It's finding ways to integrate what I've been through with who I am, both despite of it and because of it. It's not about trying to get rid of these pieces of me that have been shaped by it, because that's never really going to happen. It's about trying to accept the parts of myself, acknowledge I didn't deserve it, and it wasn't something that was okay. So 2 more, connecting with others. Trauma and violence can be such an isolating experience. You know, you see these numbers and it seems like, wow, it happens to a lot of people, but people don't talk about it. And it can really be hard to share this with people, know who you can trust with these experiences and disclosing these things. And just in general, when you're harmed in a sexual way, it can just taint your view on the world. It might make you not want to get close to people. I do some research with body maps, and one image that's stuck in my brain, people draw on these empty bodies. How does it feel to be in your body after these experiences? And someone drew these spikes on their hands. And they were saying, you know, it feels like I just can't get close to people, no matter how hard I try. And so that's a goal people have, to get back to that. And so by pushing themselves to connect with professionals, those who care about them, survivors are better able to find support, build and maintain these relationships, and feel less alone. So it's about being authentic, knowing who to trust, and letting people in, but also recognizing, what other people do I need on my healing team? Who else do I need, and how can I build those strong support networks? And also set some boundaries on people that maybe aren't helping. And that can be really hard when they're people that we love and that we value their opinion, but some folks just don't get it. And in order to heal, we might need to create some distance between those people. And that's a difficult decision, but one that's necessary depending on your circumstance. So one survivor shared, connect with others, even if it's hard. Healing is a huge weight to bear, but you do not need to bear it all on your own. And so finally, regaining hope and power. So ultimately, survivors really aimed to regain that hope and that power in their life, that things can get better and that they have the capacity to make things better despite what they've experienced, despite the fact that structurally this is so entrenched in a lot of our systems. And it's unfortunate, and there's only so much you can control. And there's always that tension, that resiliency, right? We tell people to be resilient, but then they're put back in environments that are extremely traumatizing and violent and not supportive. And so this is really tricky as a practitioner, because you can only control so much as a survivor, but it is important to regain that sense of control. And so being able to really have those positive perspectives of their future, focusing on, what do I want to achieve for myself? What do I really want separate of this experience? And how can I heal and work towards meeting my goals and getting to the place that I want to be? And people really sought to build a future that was often separate from their abuse experiences. Some people go into the work and they become advocates, they become service providers, they become researchers in this area, but a lot of times they're doing something completely different. And that's okay. I mean, I don't think that for everyone, this being their whole life is not ideal. And so really regaining hope and power consisted of embracing that freedom, especially after a violent relationship. You know, you have the freedom to do things that you didn't used to be able to do. What does that freedom look like? How are you going to take advantage of that? Or the freedom from negative symptoms that can finally see the sunlight. Now, what do I do? Finding purpose, no matter what that is, and ultimately building hope. So one survivor shared, healing is the strength to move forward and not letting what hurt you hold you back, still being who you are and pursuing what you want, and learning to love yourself. So we put all these themes together, and I think it's important. We have these themes, but how do they all fit together? And so myself and my team, we were really thinking of what's a good metaphor that can describe how these things interact. And so we thought and came up with this idea of weaving a tapestry of knotted silk. So I'll share this imagery with you now as a means to just try to explain in a more metaphoric sense how these things might fit together. So I invite you to imagine you are a spool of silk thread and you're weaving this tapestry that is your life. And trauma can have an impact on the integrity of the thread. It can unravel it and create those kinks and knots along these strands that used to be so smooth. And at first you could think that you can continue using this thread and just build the tapestry and kind of like force over the knots. And like, if I can just like shove this knot in, I don't have to address it. I don't have to think about it. You have in your mind what you've woven before and what you want it to look like. And you think you can just kind of push through. But sometimes those knots, when you try to push them down, they can become even bigger. And eventually it can feel impossible to move forward without addressing them. And so frustration may force you to put the tapestry away for a while and just kind of sitting in that sorrow because starting over is just too hard. But then for many people, a shift happens. And this can happen at various points. And eventually you might recognize that untangling these knots is unavoidable and actually necessary to move forward. And it's not fun. Who likes untying knots when they're all, my jewelry gets all tangled and it drives me nuts. I just want to get a new piece. I can't deal with it. So I think it's something that can be frustrating and hard to embark on. But once you do, you can refocus on starting anew. So then once you start doing this weaving and this untangling, you realize you don't have to do it alone. You can do it with the help of a loved one or a professional, and you can slowly begin to address each knot. And as you do, the knots grow smaller. And it's important to acknowledge every knot that you untie because it's not easy. And some might disappear completely. But sometimes you might uncover even bigger knots as you're untying these small knots, and they can be too big to untangle on your own. So you might just need the help of someone else to get through just that section of thread. People might work alongside you as you untangle, or just need some encouragement from the sidelines as you do it on your own. Or maybe just distraction so that you have the strength to rest and go back to this untangling later. We can't just devote our lives to untangling, otherwise we'll just be frustrated all the time. So through this process, you will recognize that you have all the tools necessary to rebuild within you, but you might have just lost sight of your path and where you left off. So by regaining that vision of what that tapestry looks like and recognizing it might look different than you initially intended, but that's okay. It's a product of you and who you are, and therefore it's beautiful and it's important. So who knows, you might even inspire someone else you encounter along the way to continue their own weaving and their untangling of their knots. So really, I think our tapestries tell a story. It depicts all that we are, our strengths, our triumphs, and our traumas. So with that, I am going to share our virtual photography exhibit. So I'm going to escape from this and go to the exhibit. And so I'm not going to go through this exhibit in full with you, but I will click through just to show you how to get there. If some handy dandy person who is a panelist would mind putting this in the chat, this can be found at discover.ourwave.org. This is like extra stuff. You can just put that and it'll come. So I invite you to take a look at this exhibit when we're done with the presentation. So when you enter, you'll see a letter from myself. You will then see some of these graphics that I shared in this presentation. So you're really kind of ahead of the game because you got the overview. But what I think is really interesting here that I wasn't able to share is the stories and the images and the real survivors behind these themes. So for each theme, you'll see the definition, you'll see some quotes, and also these sub-themes, which you can click on. So you'll see if you click on a theme, you'll see all these photographs that are from real survivors who are sharing their experiences with us. And so when you click on the photo, you can see the caption that they chose for each photo, as well as a story behind the photograph. So just to provide some context, these survivors were asked to go out into their world and photograph moments that just felt healing, whatever that means for them. And also moments that potentially feel darker or more challenging. And so, because we know healing is not just the sunshine and rainbows, it's also kind of the difficult parts. And so with that, all of these photographs, they came back, we did a one-on-one interview, and we discussed 7 to 10 of these photographs where they captioned each photograph and then gave a story about them. And that's what you can see here. So I'll invite you to click through. There's so much to see. I feel like I made this, and every time I click on a new theme, I like forget how impactful and amazing these stories are. So as you click through, all the themes I shared are there, all the text is there. So this is a nice little take home for anybody that wants to reflect on this later. We go through our analogy of a tapestry that I shared. And then finally, this is like a thank you to everybody that was so helpful. You can see Julia and Angela, who were the project coordinators, these collaborators, all of these amazing organizational partners. So yes, I really invite you to take a look. Another thing I want to share while I'm here is one of the things that we wanted to do with this exhibit, and I will go back and have to click through again because of course I missed it. We wanted this to be a living, breathing exhibit that can continuously be added, continuously be changing, and that people who were attending the exhibit or people who want to view the exhibit might be able to give their own take on what healing means to them and share their own stories. So you can see on the top left, we have a guest book. If you're there, I invite you to click on it, sign something, let us know you were here. But also, if you see at the bottom here, if you want to share your own story, photographs, or artwork, if you click on this, I can show you what you can do. So I'm not going to go through the story submission, but I will go to our general stories so you can take a look at the live exhibit you could be adding to. So we start with a grounding activity on this page. And so this is just because there's it's a lot of trauma to hold when you're thinking about these stories and reading them. So if you want to do a grounding activity, take a look. They're randomized. There's new ones every time. Once you feel grounded and ready, this is our site. So when you go and submit your story, you can share your story. You can send a definition of healing, what that means to you, and then also a word of advice that you'd like to give to another survivor who might be perusing this page. And so I'll scroll down and you can see we have amazing photos, images, all different sorts of things. And so I will click on one just to show you what it looks like. And so you can update your story too. So some people like do different journal entries. This is where I'm at now in my process. This is where I'm at now in my process. And that's helpful to see that journey. So you can see this is the story that they shared, their message of healing. So they said healing is being able to cope with the day-to-day life and the realities of being a survivor. And then also a message to other survivors. So this person said to all trans survivors out there, don't feel joining that sexual assault therapy group at your school. This person was the only trans woman in a group of cis women, and they had a great experience. And so you're also able, when you go to the stories, you can do these different filters. So if you're a part of a particular group like LGBTQ+, you can just see stories based on these different groups. So you can try to find your people within this giant space. And then finally, you can interact with stories. So saying, thank you for sharing. You made me feel hopeful. I can relate to this. And this doesn't build individual likes, but what it does build is our global metrics of impact. Because we don't want this to be like a social media site where there's a hierarchy of stories that are more important. We really wanted it to be a place where we can just celebrate healing, talk about our traumas, and we're constantly adding new features. And so we're trying to keep this safe, anonymous. The big thing with this is we have all data security people. It's super secure and super anonymous. So unlike, posting things on your private social media where people can tie them to you, it can be really a private space of reflection. So with that, I am going to X this out and I'm going to share our video with everybody. So let me get to that. And so this video is called Finding the Strength to Heal. It is a video that I did out at University of Michigan when I was getting my PhD. This features survivors in the Ann Arbor, Detroit area who were a survivor of sexual violence on a college campus. And so this was truly a labor of love. Everybody here was volunteer. No one was paid. The beautiful filmmaking is by a man named Michael Bachter. I encourage you to look him up. He was a pre-medical student at the time and just wanted to take a stab at making some film. He's made films in the past and wanted that experience. And he created this with us. And so it was amazing. All of the actresses here are serving as surrogate speakers, meaning that these are the stories of people I interviewed anonymously who agreed to let us share their stories by having somebody else read them. So these are acting students at University of Michigan, but many had a personal connection to the topic of sexual harm. And so really a lot of it is acting, but really it was truly beautiful to watch them embody these people. So I am going to unmute and then maximize my screen and hit play.
I have been working at the university for 2.5 years now. I am a lab manager. I can be there anywhere from 7 in the morning until 10 at night, depending on how research is going. The rest of my time is usually spent with friends or with my dog and my cat.
I just graduated. I'm kind of vacationing before I start my job in September. I work and I'm studying for the GRE. I also have been spending a lot of time with friends. My boyfriend is very important to me, and we spend nearly every day together.
I'm on the basketball team. I have a lot going on balancing school and athletics, making sure I get everything done. I like to read and write and play with my cat. I either want to go to grad school for psychology or go to medical school.
I'm a biomolecular science major, but I'm also a really big artist. I also like to cook myself meals, I live with my roommates, and I go to class. Nothing too special. My weeks honestly haven't been too typical this year, and I've had a really crazy year. I don't know.
Being a lab manager, I kind of have to be the head of everything. I also have a couple of friends who were really close to me in high school or college, and now whenever we meet up, it just seems pretty strained because we've changed. We've all changed so much over the past year.
I'm stressed because I'm going to be leaving in a couple of months. I'm kind of worried what my social network will be like and how it's going to change. The prospect of moving and just being away not only from my friends but my boyfriend. I just feel this impending separation.
I'm an overall quiet person. I struggle a lot with mental health stuff. I have a lot going on balancing school and basketball and everything else. I'm athletic, but not athletic enough. I'm not where I need to be, and I'm constantly being told that I'm not where I need to be.
I haven't felt really hopeful or successful recently. I have so much on my plate. When I find myself not doing homework and doodling or watching TV, I totally kick myself for it. That's kind of where I'm at.
I was raped when I was 14.
Right at the beginning of the second semester of my freshman year.
My senior year of high school.
At the end of freshman year.
And then again when I was 18 on campus.
And again, later that summer. It happened more than once.
My ex-boyfriend.
By a friend. I was living alone. I was asleep. I woke up in the middle of it. It was a real shock. He wasn't physically violent, but I didn't know if he was going to attack me or kill me or something. I broke my wrist and my fingers during that event.
You don't want to think of yourself as being raped by your significant other. When I tried to confront him about it, he would say that I was imagining things.
My depression got really, really bad. I started making a bunch of changes to my medications and trying to work out of it. My team would go out and he was always out too, so I would see him a lot.
My grades started to drop. It was just a really confusing time. I basically failed everything. That really sucked because I had never struggled before, and to be unable to focus or be in my body was just so hard because it was unfair, and that sucked. The thing that hurt the most about that experience was that my friends, who knew what had happened, they stayed friends with him afterwards.
I I didn't know how to function without him. I wasn't an independent person anymore.
I was depressed.
I felt disgusted.
I thought I was weak.
I thought it was all my fault.
I didn't know it was possible to be that down and still alive.
I constantly have a storm in my mind. Sometimes it is just cloudy, overcast, and sometimes it is a thunderstorm of both worry and stress. Every time I would think about him, I would feel like I was choking, feeling completely helpless, scared of the situation, scared of myself, scared of how I was going to recover from it.
It just fucked me up.
I had this weird paranoia where I thought that everyone could tell. Like, I would walk in the dining hall and feel like people knew or something.
You'd be like having the best time of your life, and then a thought crosses your head, and it's like, I need to go cry. I need to lay down and sleep.
I physically got to such a bad point that I was like, okay, I need to go to therapy. I showed up to the first therapy meeting absolutely shit-faced drunk. It was darkly hilarious. Sharing is really difficult for me.
For some people, recounting their story can be really traumatic, but for me, it actually helped a lot to process it.
My parents were there the whole time. My dad called me every single day just to make sure that I was doing okay, and my mom actually just dropped work and flew out to stay with me for a few days.
My trainer was really, really helpful. Like, she doesn't know it, but she's kind of like a mom to me.
My investigator. She was the only person that I really talked about it with.
That was the start of a wake-up, of clearing the clouds and getting away from the absolute depression that I was in. I spent a lot of time building myself back up, making a dedicated effort to find those healing moments.
Going to groups and finding a community of survivors to talk to was helpful. The whole not alone thing. You get told that a million times and that it is not your fault, but sometimes you have to come to that conclusion on your own to really believe it.
This is a place where I don't feel alone. This is a place where I feel at home.
Healing is moving towards, I guess, not a perfect place, but a place that's good enough.
Healing is a non-linear, time-consuming breaking of your core beliefs to make room for rebuilding.
Healing is focusing on parts of myself that I want to expand on and develop the things that I always wanted to be.
Healing can be kind of a destructive process, in a good way. It's like when they control burn parts of a forest, but you don't have to do it alone.
Healing means that you are not alone. Recognizing that even though our experiences may be different, we're all connected.
Healing is going out and doing things normal people wouldn't think twice about.
Recognizing that this experience has happened to you and it's affected you, but it does not define you.
Using your rock bottoms to push yourself towards doing things that you would have previously been too scared to do.
It just kind of feels like this weight. You know, very cliche, like having a weight kind of lifted off your shoulders.
My advice to anyone who is feeling stuck in their healing is to listen to the cliches. It may sound stupid, but they're true.
The healing process is like an elevator. There are points where you can get off on the way down, but you might not be ready today, and that's okay.
I want other survivors to know it is never your fault. Be gentle with yourself.
Forgive yourself for all the things that are gonna go wrong. Because a lot of times healing isn't effective unless a lot has gone wrong.
Connect with others, even if it is hard.
Allow yourself to be vulnerable. Healing can be a huge weight to bear, but you don't have to bear it all on